Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to our colleagues in the West. Very glad you're with us for the 2022 DoD Cloud Exchange. We've got what we think is going to be a great week of content lined up for you this week. And if you've joined us on any of our previous cloud exchanges, hopefully you've gotten the gist of what we try to do with these events, which is to zoom out a little bit from the day-to-day cloud computing news that me and my colleagues across the media space report on day in and day out, and really let our government and industry speakers give you something like a State of the Union for where DoD is in its adoption of cloud computing as of this moment in the big grand scheme of things. The common theme of the events that we've tried to do so far is really to highlight real concrete progress as well. This year, the theme that we're trying to organize around is the role that cloud is playing in the bigger IT strategic frameworks that DoD and the military services have been working on and have indeed published now. And I think that's happened in a way where the question is less about how do we get to the cloud, less about assuming that cloud is inherently going to be better in all cases than on-premise environments, and more about why DoD is going to the cloud in the first place and what it can get from being in the cloud. Leadership has done quite a bit over the past year to sharpen up thinking on things like where we think cloud fits in our digital transformation strategy, and there are different words for that, but directionally I think you're seeing a lot of commonality across the services and agencies and at the OSD level. And it's hard to point to a better example of everything I just talked about than the brand new DoD software modernization strategy that just came out from OSD last month. It's a perfect place to start this conversation on this year's DoD Cloud Exchange. And for our kickoff keynote, we're very glad to have with us Danielle Metz, the Deputy DoD CIO for Information Enterprise, to talk more about that strategy at the DoD level and all other things cloud from the OSD perspective. Ms. Metz, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And Ms. Metz, let's dig into that software modernization strategy. One of the things that it's very clear about is that it is also the new DoD Cloud Strategy. Talk a bit about why you decided to fold all of that together into a broader software modernization strategy rather than just doing a new standalone update to the cloud strategy.
Yeah, after our initial cloud strategy that we published in 2018, we began to realize that the mission impact was not immediately jumping out at folks, and that the purpose in guiding the department to the cloud was never to migrate to this really cool technology called the cloud. And so what we wanted to be able to do was to rethink that. So starting in late 2019, we began a very measured, strategic shift to software modernization being the primary driver for why we wanted people to go to the cloud, why we wanted to move the department to go to the cloud. And it was really the rationale for why the systems needed to go to the cloud. And so all of this is now reflected in our new software modernization strategy that was published last month. I don't think it really makes a lot of sense to separate software modernization from cloud adoption, because it would imply that software could be modernized without cloud. And by placing the cloud at the center of the technology enablers of the strategy that we just did, it absolutely affirms the importance of cloud and why we want the department to move and migrate to cloud, both the military departments as well as the Fourth Estate. And it's further reinforced in the DoD CIO's capability planning guidance that we've been issuing and sharing with the military departments, as well as the Fourth Estate for the past few years, guiding them towards an industry standard target of cloud spend while achieving the benefits of decommissioning their legacy systems.
So in some ways, these things are mutually reinforcing. You do get some cost savings, or don't you? Because the sort of the thought leadership in the DoD space has gone a bit back and forth on that over the years as to whether this saves you money in the end or doesn't, whether cost savings is really an objective in the first place or not. Have we shifted back to the idea that not only is it a better mission enabler, you can also save money if you do it right?
Yeah, I think, the idea of saving money by going to the cloud was a misnomer, not only for the department, but for the federal government. And I think it's just because we didn't really understand our inventory, the application and workloads, where they were, and how hard it would be to transform those workloads to be cloud enabled and cloud ready. And so that was a false premise. But I think now, and that's the reason why we've kind of broadened the aperture of what we think the problem statement is, and it's how do you quickly and agilely develop and then get capability to, for us, the warfighter, at the speed of relevance. And so it really comes down to harnessing the power of the cloud compute, and then being able to natively build applications continuously and often in that space. And so it also affords better cybersecurity, the ability to have technology at the fingertips of our warfighter, as opposed to trying to have this hardware-intensive platform that you then bolt on software. So I think that there could be an opportunity for cost savings, but that's really not the primary driver. It's all about agility, the cybersecurity, making sure that our warfighter has exactly what he and she needs at the time that she needs it.
Another just high-level thing on the strategy before we dig into some of the details inside of it. Noteworthy on this one is that it has the signature of the Deputy Secretary of Defense. Talk a bit how important that is, because I think that is also new when it comes to a DoD IT strategy document.
Yeah, it's extremely important. And quite frankly, the DoD Cloud Strategy that was signed out in 2018 was also signed out by Deputy Secretary of Defense. Okay. And so it's a complement, and it's a recognition in terms of the importance of this being a joint endeavor for the entire department. And it's not just coming from one organization saying that we need to do this. It is combining superpowers of three Office of Secretary of Defense components: our research and engineering brothers and sisters, our acquisition and sustainment brothers and sisters, and of course DoD CIO. And so we recognize that we need to have software modernization principles and practices within the department, and how we go about doing that through the combined superpowers of those three organizations is that we want to remove impediments in our business processes that allow us to think and obtain agile technology, and really inculcate that into our business processes, so it's not just done by exception, which is what has been happening for the past, I would say 3 to 4 years. We know that we have a problem, but instead of fixing the actual problem, kind of wave a wand, give an exception, and test it out and see if it works. But we never really fully inculcate those lessons learned into our day-to-day normal business practices to make it just normal. And I think it's a recognition of the Secretary Hicks' signature, recognizing not only that we have the strategy, but she also tasked us on an implementation plan. How are we going to execute? What are our goals, our objectives, and metrics to ensure that we're trending in the right direction and actually making progress? And so that was a task that she gave to us. And then I think by the summertime, we will have that to her.
I was wondering if you could dig in a little bit more into those exceptions that you talked about having to make in the past in order to make cloud projects go across the department. It gets to some of that implementation work that you talked about, and I'm not going to ask you to forecast what that policy development process is going to look like, but what sort of hacks and workarounds has the department had to do to make cloud work in the past?
So I think it comes down to, if you look at our business enablers, it's really acquisition, contracting, the color of money. And so that's within the A&S lane. Then you can see within the CIO lane, it's really about cybersecurity, this thing called continuous ATO, which the DoD CISO signed out last month as well, that really articulated what the definition of continuous ATO, so we can use the same nomenclature, the process in terms of how we would go about doing it for DevSecOps, and that, as we go through this process, the DoD CISO will be the one that will provide the authorizations for this, and really it's to ensure that all authorizing officials can become educated and standardized in how they would do this in the DevSecOps manner, and then move forward in that way. So it's kind of a transitional type thing. So I think that was within CIO's lanes. And then for research and engineering, for the maturing research that they are taking place, these brilliant ideas that are incubated, how do we move that forward to an ecosystem, a software ecosystem that is going to be ready to accept and then sustain that ecosystem? And then again, partnering back with A&S in terms of how we go about procuring that ecosystem to be able to create, to prevent that valley of death activity that we know happens, not only within the department, but quite frankly, even in Silicon Valley.
Since you brought up the continuous ATO memo, let me pull on that thread just a little bit. I don't want to drag you too much into CISO land.
I appreciate that.
Since you're not the CISO, but as I recall, that continuous ATO memo came out the exact same week as the software modernization strategy. I'm guessing that wasn't a coincidence, but I don't think they made explicit references to each other. In the real world, how do those two things play on each other, and how interdependent are they on?
It was significant, and I wished I can claim credit for the timing of that. We had been working on the software modernization strategy for almost a year. And the reason why we took the time for that year is because we really wanted to ensure that each of the stakeholders across the department, military services as well as the DAFAs and combatant commands, could see themselves in that strategy and then take ownership for its execution. Separate from that, we spent about 8 months doing the continuous ATO memo, working through the CISO community, creating outreach, ensuring that they understood that they also had buy-in from how we wanted to proceed with that. And so for the continuous ATO, it's really focused on DevSecOps. And software modernization isn't limited to DevSecOps. It's one of many. And so when there's other software modernization practices and principles that can come forward, there is a pathway within the continuous ATO memo to bring that forward to the DoD CISO to be able to review, and then we can create another process similar to what we're doing with DevSecOps to always have this continuous authorization to operate. So it's not limited to DevSecOps, but DevSecOps is our pathfinder for the continuous ATO.
So what other paths would there be? Is it sort of along the lines that DevSecOps makes sense for new system development, and you might need other pathways for the legacy? How do you think about the separation between those lanes?
Well, I think it's just an evolution where there could be the next thing beyond DevSecOps that could be considered under the umbrella of software modernization practices. Just everyone's very familiar with DevSecOps. It's been happening for a while, but that's not to say that it's going to be the end-all be-all. And so we wanted to be able to not necessarily future-proof, but allow opportunity for that innovation. So if there's another modern practice that goes about doing and having an operational effect, we wanted to make sure that we can also include that. So I wish I had that crystal ball to be able to predict that. I don't, but I also know, based on working in the department for 15 years, that the new thing that you're working on right now isn't always going to be the new thing.
Sure. All right, well, that DevSecOps piece takes us a little bit into, I think, one of the key pillars of the software modernization strategy, which is the big emphasis on software factories and their role in this ecosystem. Talk about why the department chose to make those factories such a key piece of this strategy and where you see them playing a role.
Yeah, I think for the software modernization strategy, we really have like 3 pillars. So the digital infrastructure piece, where we have cloud as the fulcrum, and then that's where you can have the ecosystems for the software factories. And going back to what our previous conversation regarding exceptions, so we had Platform 1, we have with the Air Force, Black Pearl with the Navy. In order to get their software factory stood up, there were some exceptions to policy that needed to take place. And so that's what I mean by having exceptions for exceptionalism. And they were amazing to be able to do that, because we were able to glean so much of their lessons learned and partner with them. And part of the work that they've done is translated into the software modernization strategy that was just recently published.
Right, so that enterprise cloud environment being the first pillar, maybe you can take us through the other 2 quickly, and then we'll dig into some details.
Yeah, absolutely. So we wanted to also focus not only on the technical enablers, but also the fact that we need to have transformation in our technology and system process transformation, as well as our people and business transformations. And that totality is what leads us to software modernization. I think the software factory is a key aspect, because this is where we can really focus on having some commonality and ecosystem jointness, which will allow for the military services, the combatant commands to act and behave like a joint force. And this is really what's going to get us to that next stage of the Joint All-Domain C2.
A lot of software factories in DoD right now. Is 29 the right number?
29 is the right number and counting, but
Right.
We're at 29 right now.
The current number, maybe not the right number.
We'll go with current.
But they're also not evenly spread across the services, right? I think there's a lot in the Air Force
Absolutely.
and only 1 in the Army. Does the implementation plan that you're working on over the next few months start to try to answer the question of what the right number is and not just what the current number is?
I think we don't want to limit how many software factories we will have, but I do think what we want to go after is optimize the software factories and ensure that we have common tools, because if you look at each of the software factories, you can see a lot of the same tools that are being used. So there is an opportunity to be able to optimize, to do enterprise service contracting for that. So there's a way that you can glean some cost efficiencies and some operational effectiveness. I think for software repositories, software code repositories, there's an opportunity there that we can standardize, make that an enterprise service, which will allow not only for better collaboration across different mission partners, but better innovation and reuse, so that you're not having to do everything in your stovepipe and try to figure things out. We really want to be able to democratize that activity where we can and allow for a core foundation so that each of the services, or even the combatant commands, where they have a very specific, unique mission, they can build upon instead of having to redo everything from scratch.
That code reuse piece seems really huge to me. And as I recall, the Defense Innovation Board made a big point of that in their SWAP study a couple years ago. Talk about some of the discrete benefits that you see coming from that. I mean, speed feels like the obvious one if you're not recoding stuff that's already been coded 4 other times in some other part of DoD.
Yeah, it absolutely is speed. It's the reuse piece. It's the fact that you don't have to invest, and then there's just so much duplication in terms of not sharing. And I think that this is the opportunity, like software, the ability that you're virtual in a cloud affords you the ability to share, and you want to share it because that's where you get that innovation and collaboration. And so I think it really is a cultural shift from having like a physical instantiation of something and saying it's yours to being in a space where you can actually play, use, and inspire for others. And so that's really what we're focused on. And for the DIB swap study that took place, we really took that to heart. So that's why over the past, now it's been 3 years, everything that they pointed out is now you can see embodied within the software modernization strategy.
All right, then let's transition a bit to the third big pillar in the strategy, which is transforming your processes to make all of this work. You already talked a bit about how exceptions to policy were required to make previous cloud projects go in the past, but talk a bit more about where this goal is going to take you.
Yeah, so I think for the first step, it's really from the acquisition standpoint. So A&S has done over the past couple of years a reformation in terms of their 5000 series for acquisition, and really separating how we've always done acquisition, thinking of it as a hardware intensive with software kind of on the back end, or IT on the back end. I remember going to DAU a number of years ago as a program manager. I was doing IT, but yet I was learning to be a program manager as if I was going to deliver an aircraft carrier. So it was 15 plus years, a waterfall approach, and that just does not translate for delivering technology the way that we want to deliver. So A&S has done an exceptional job in terms of transforming their acquisition, really focus on agility, software Pathfinder, and then doing outreach within DAU and others, and having partnership with the program executive offices where a lot of this work is taking place in terms of the acquisition of technology, the acquisition of software factories, and things of that nature. I think even within the CIO, we've done some good work. The biggest is what we've talked about with the continuous ATO. That was a huge mind shift in terms of what we were doing with risk management framework, and then expanding it to focus on continuous monitoring. And so that's part of what continuous ATO is. I think there was a misnomer in people thinking about continuous ATO as like, oh, we're throwing out our risk management framework. No, because risk management framework always had continuous monitoring. We just weren't doing it. And so with DevSecOps and the way that we have it set up, we can actually do it. And so that was a big shift from CIO. And then, of course, we're also, the department's piloting the Budget Activity 8 for software and digital pathfinders, this idea of colorless money. Right now we have a significant problem, and I know that it was also, it's been well studied and reported in terms of like how our money is tagged. So for sustainment dollars, you can't do anything new, development for technology. And so that's really been hamstringing us in on how we're going to do DevSecOps. Because there's a blending of development, operations, and security. But our money and how we use our money isn't affording us to do that. So these pilot efforts that are taking place will inform our financial policies moving forward, and it will open up the gates for us to even be able to be more agile in terms of doing DevSecOps.
I want to stick with the colorless money piece because it seems like there's a ton of potential there, and Congress has created a pilot authority that I think we're in the second year of now. Relatively limited number of programs in there so far, but have you seen any meaningful results that lead you to believe this is the way we got to fund software from now on?
I absolutely do, and I think that as Air Force has a piece, Navy has a piece, there's a defense-wide piece. OSD is participating as well. R&E has been forward-leaning in this, and so I think that what we have to figure out is, from the results of the pilot, how are we going to transform those policies in order for us to be able not to have exceptions and not have oversight. And I think it's that sweet spot balancing the ability to go fast without sacrificing accountability.
Well, yeah, and it seems like a huge part of this is just showing Congress that you can get really great results out of this, assuming you get really great results out of it, and you don't lose the ability for the Hill to track your spend. So are you at a point, more of an acquisition question maybe, but are you at a point yet where you can go up to the Hill and say, look how well this worked?
I don't think we're there yet. So I think that's year two. It always takes a while to be able to actually do an execution, analyze the results, and come up with a thoughtful policy change, and then be able to socialize that with Congress. And I think that by the next year we should be able to be in a better position to have that come to fruition.
And along similar lines, you brought up the software acquisition pathway, which DAU has done a lot of work on trying to get the workforce ready to adopt. I think that has also been a little bit slow in terms of making its way out into implementation. Is that, or do we know yet whether that is the obvious way to do software from now on?
Well, I think we have about 35 programs that are following that. And over the past year and a half, that's fairly remarkable in terms of shifting, and not just saying it by name, but actually following that pathway. And I think that this allows us opportunities to learn. If we need to tweak, we can be able to do that. And that was the really nice thing about how A&S did the 5000 series, where they were able to piece part it out so that if you have to make a change, you weren't changing the whole volume of the 5000 series. It was one of those specific types of elements. And so I think, there's a lot we don't know. We have to actually do. And the nice thing is that we're out of the theoretical, philosophical mode, and we're actually doing, which will then inform and we can keep building upon.
I'm going to ask a dangerous CISO-related question again here, and we'll see if you can tackle it. But I think it's relevant to the whole accelerating technology development in the cloud piece. One of the things that I've heard more than once recently regarding RMF and the need for Rmf reform is that even if you get an ATO for a cloud service offering, people feel like they've got to reauthorize it every single time they want to put a new service offering in that cloud environment. So why are we bothering in the first place? And that's another thing that I have heard really slows things down. I can't tell if that's just a misapprehension of what the RMF process is supposed to be, or if it's a real thing. Is that something that you're examining as part of this process?
Yeah, and I think the continuous ATO piece also goes after that, because as you have an environment that has been certified or authority to operate, and then as you add new services in, how do you go about ensuring that that new service doesn't impact or cause undue harm? And that's what we were trying to do with the model of continuous ATO. How can you continuously monitor, understand where there are vulnerabilities, and then quickly go about mitigating said vulnerabilities, as opposed to how we have been doing RMF in the past, where it was a static 3-year type thing, more compliance, check the box. So we were really being placed in a less secure cybersecurity posture in that manner. And so there's going to be fits and starts with this too. This is something that's fairly brand new for the department. And that's the reason why within the continuous ATO, we wanted to make sure that there was an opportunity to be able to educate and ensure that the authorizing officials rise the tide for all. Because we recognize that this is new and we need to make sure that everyone is witting of how to do this and that we're going to have to constantly build upon it.
As you've already mentioned, really key to this whole strategy is bringing the R&E, the ANS, and the CIO communities together. Does that continue beyond this initial 180-day implementation framework development process? I mean, do there need to be ongoing permanent linkages between those three teams?
Well, we have been working together for the past 2 years, and really this software modernization strategy codifies the fact that these three organizations are the facilitators or the leaders for software modernization, and that we're partnered with the military services, the combatant commands, and fourth estates to move the department in this direction. So we will continue to do this. And I think what's really amazing to witness in the past 2 years that we've been doing this is that there has been an incredible coalition of the willing from not only across those three organizations, but the military services and DAFAs, people who really want to have positive change. And so we were able to capitalize on that and do a lot of informal engagements with our DevSecOps community of practice, where we marry industry, academia, the entire department together, so we can have an open and safe space where we can share lessons learned, discuss about openly failures, because inevitably we fail, and how do we go about ensuring that we can learn from that and move forward. And so a lot of these activities we've been able to kind of bring together, and now we're at the point where we formalized it within a strategy. So we've connected the department's leaders' strategic vision to people who really want to make it happen. And you rarely get to see that and be a part of that, and that's where we are right now. So it's an incredible time to be in the department working on this activity.
Yeah, and you said this was socialized amongst the military departments and all the key stakeholders before the actual strategy comes out. Do those same stakeholders have a voice in this implementation roadmap that still needs to get written?
Absolutely. Certainly, and so we're using the Software Modernization Senior Steering Group. So I'm one of the chairs along with Phil Rogers from ANS and Stephanie Polson from R&E. And last month, the team presented the outline, the methodology of how we would go about building the implementation plan, and received approval from everyone. And we have an action officer working group that is under the Software Modernization Steering Group, that 50 members strong. They're the ones who are actually going to put pen to paper, work this through, and there's representatives, the cross-functional team from military departments, the fourth estate, program executive officers, operators, acquisition experts, et cetera. So we really want to have that full complement, because we really believe that this challenge is for all of us to solve, not just one organization or one skill set.
In our last 15 minutes here, I do want to loop back around to the first goal that we haven't talked about a ton, which is, as you put it, accelerate the DoD enterprise cloud environment. Part of that, I think, and the strategy makes clear, is going to be rationalizing the total number of cloud contracts that are out there in OSD and DISA in the military services, and coming up with a set of contracts that complement each other and that make sense. Certainly not asking you to pick winners and losers in front of the cameras right now, but can you walk us through sort of what the objective there is and what that process might look like, and what questions you're going to be asking as you try to come up with a sensible portfolio in the coming years?
Yeah, I think that a lot of what we're trying to do with software modernization, particularly that digital infrastructure piece, is to go about enterprise services. And a big one that we are trying to tackle is with our forthcoming joint warfighting cloud capability. And so this truly is going to be an enterprise cloud service for the entire department that will provide the full complement of what is currently missing in terms of requirements from unclassified to top secret to tactical edge, cloud infrastructure and associated services. Right now, the military departments have piece parts of what I just described for themselves. Really, the combatant commands and DAFAs don't have access to that, and so it's been a struggle. So this is the urgent unmet need that we are working through with JWCC. And so I think that it is not, unlike its predecessor, we're not mandating this. This really is access for all. The focus is going to be the fourth estate. So when I say fourth estate, it's the combatant commands, it's our defense agencies' field activities, and the OSD components that are in the Pentagon. As military services need capabilities and services that they don't have on their current contracts, they're absolutely able to use the JWCC. As those individual cloud contracts expire, JWCC is available for use. They don't have to go out and do their own. So there is trade space and flexibility to allow for an optimization of enterprise services. The JWCC will be for 5 years once it's awarded, so 3-year base to 1-year option years. And then the next big push that the department wants to do is a cloud market space. And so we will go after that as well.
Way too early to get into a ton of detail on what that marketplace might look like, but can you just give some initial ideas on how that would differ fundamentally from what JWCC is going to be?
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest differentiator is that for JWCC, we did direct solicitations to the cloud service providers. So we were very narrow in our scope because we wanted to be able to have capability quickly because we've had that urgent unmet need. For the cloud marketplace, it would not be exclusive to cloud service providers, so integrators, et cetera, would be able to participate.
Got it. Let's talk more about JWCC specifically. You've given us some of the high-level details about it so far. I think one of the most interesting bits that you guys are doing is how the task order selection process is going to work. So just to set this up a little bit for folks, one of the ways this is different is that each of the hyperscale cloud computing vendors is going to get their own IDIQ contract, I believe is the way it's going to work, and then task orders will be made on those individual 2, 3, 4 contracts. I don't think we know exactly yet how many there's going to be at this point. But talk us through how that sort of innovative task order award process is notionally going to work.
Yeah, I think the struggle has always been is the fact that normally when you do, as you just described, task order competition, it could take up to 45 days, and that is unsatisfactory. And so the team has been working really hard to absolutely streamline that and make it down to 5 to 10 days. And the way that they've gone about this is pre-populating templates that the contracting officer will work with a mission partner to be able to fill in. The hosting and cloud computing office is the program manager for the JWCC, so they will be the ones creating this white glove treatment, working with the mission partners to refine requirements to populate into those pre-populated templates. That will kick off the task order initiation. Then we'll have task order award. And once we have task order award, the mission partner will be able to buy services through our tool called AT-AT. It's our provisioning tool. They'll be able to monitor and see services, their consumption rate, et cetera. So that will be their portal into, once it's been awarded, how they'll be able to manage the capabilities that they just purchased.
Are vendors going to have any sort of insight into maybe why a competitor's project was chosen for a particular requirement and theirs weren't? Because it seems to me there's got to be some sort of feedback process of some kind so that they can continue improving their services and make sure they're as relevant as they possibly can be to DoD's requirements, since they are not proactively responding to individual solicitations each time. This is kind of an automated process.
Yeah, so I think what it's going to come down to is, are the services available at the time where the mission partner needs it, and cost. And so those are going to be the two things that are going to drive the competition. And there will be a feedback loop in order for, because it's a competition, so each of the CSPs that have those IDIQs will be able to refine, get better. And if they have capabilities that aren't there, work really hard to ensure that that is in the catalog the next time this comes up.
But the feedback process, is it going to be more than, okay, I know I didn't win this one and company X did? Are there going to be some kind of ongoing discussions or documentation passed back and forth? Is any of that figured out yet?
I think we're still working through that piece. I mean, right now we are in the process, we're actively in the acquisition process for JWCC, reviewing the vendors' proposals. We're going to have to normalize all those proposals for to create the catalog and the price point. So I do know we're thinking about that, and I just don't have a very satisfactory answer. But those are things, by the time the contracts are awarded, we will be able to have that. And again, we'll continually refine and get better at this.
Another area we haven't talked about a ton is workforce. Talk about how a modernized software approach might impact the kind of skills you need, the number of people you need, where those people are in 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, so to me, workforce is absolutely critical. If we had all the money in the world to buy the best technology and we had the right processes in place to be able to get the needed technology at the time of consumption for our workforce and our warfighter, but that workforce, our workforce or our warfighter did not know how to use that technology to be able to execute their mission, we failed. And so we really need to focus not only on the technology enablers, the business transformation needs to take place, but our workforce. And so the workforce piece is a key enabler in that business transformation that we have as part of software modernization. I think that we are working on our strategy to be able to not only retain, cultivate, and train our current workforce, and it goes beyond just those who are actually hands-on keyboard, so to say, those scientists, those engineers that are working in the software factories, the program managers that are responsible for this, but it's the entire workforce that needs to be digitally literate. And so that's part of the strategy that we're working on and towards to be able to do that. And the other thing I'll offer is there's always going to be a focus on STEM, but we also need to broaden that aperture as well to recognize that we need to recruit a different skill set to allow for diversity of thought, and the ability to be innovative and to see things differently and talk about things differently in order to push us even further and harder. I have a bachelor's of arts, political science, and I've been in this field for 15 years, and I think my contribution is the fact that I can be strategic, think a little bit differently, and always want to learn. And so we shouldn't limit ourselves to just having just STEM. So I think that's also part of the conversation that we're doing to get our digital warfighters and workforce up to where we need them to be.
And there's so many moving parts in that bucket that we call workforce. There's the military workforce, the contractor workforce, the civilian workforce, and it almost seems like you need to pull P&R into this triad that you have now to start talking about how software modernization actually works.
Right, and P&R has been an active participant within our software modernization senior steering group. And so we've been leaning on them to their partnership with ANS. And so, like I said, it is a whole of government to make this work, to transform how we go about doing things better and, quite frankly, differently than how we have been in the past.
And one other area I wanted to make sure we got to before we run out of time here is what's the current thinking on how IT infrastructure and cloud, including cloud, works in the outside the continental United States OCONUS environment? You guys published a formal strategy on OCONUS Cloud, I want to say a year and a half, 2 years ago now. How much has that thinking changed, if at all? That was still kind of in the JEDI time period when that all came together. And we've also been hearing more, I think, from the services that their thinking has changed in a way that makes them think they're going to need more on-prem of their own in the OCONUS environment. What's the DoD perspective on all of that at this point?
Yeah, so I think that we recently published our OCONUS Cloud Strategy, which is a companion piece to what was the DoD Cloud Strategy. So that was just published in April of last year. And so that was in partnership and recognition. The combatant commands came through Joint Staff to OSD saying, we don't have cloud, we don't have access to cloud. The critical infrastructure to allow for cloud to work just isn't there. Everything's being backhauled to the United States, and we can't execute our mission. And so we articulated a very bold vision with the OCONUS Cloud Strategy. And what the JWCC is going to afford us to be able to have that infrastructure and cloud services to do that. We're partnered with the cloud service providers. They were as well as industry, they were instrumental in terms of devising this bold plan that we came out with the strategy. As you mentioned, the military services are moving forward, but what we don't want to have happen is for each of them to kind of strike out on their own and figure things out for themselves without taking a step back and recognizing there are some core enterprise services that we can have that would be foundational, even when we're talking about pushing cloud compute to the edge, and then allow for them for that last mile to springboard off for their very specific, service-specific mission. And so if you think about some of the duplication that could occur if we didn't follow that model, ICAM solutions, networking, encryption mechanisms, all of that would be vying for precious resources in an already constrained environment. And so we really want to come up with a way to be able to standardize that or provide some commonality so that each service isn't going about that for themselves. And so that's what we're trying, the DoD CIO is advocating for these common enterprise services. We have this concept called Joint Operational Edge. It's just that, a concept. We're working through our the working groups that I've mentioned under the Software Modernization Steering Group, the Action Officer. We have an OCONUS working group that has participation from the military services and the combatant commands to really flesh that out and try to figure out what is common and then have a delineation of what would be a responsibility for the services.
So, but to some degree, there will be DoD joint provided services, no kidding, all the way to the edge, not just back at some regional hub node.
That is what we want, and so that's what we're advocating for. And so that's the initial concept. The department is very much consistency driven, and so it is ensuring that we're working with our stakeholders to get a plan, not only a strategy, but an executable plan. In order to do that, we need to have their buy-in, and we can work with them on that. So we're in the early stages for that, but from my perspective, that's where I want to lead us towards.
Maybe too early to answer any of this, but what sort of things are in play that could or could not be provided at the edge as an enterprise service? I frankly still have a hard time wrapping my mind around what a cloud looks like on an actual battlefield.
I know, and so I think that because when you think about like a disconnected or limited network connectivity, a lot of it comes down to that critical infrastructure of your network. So that's thing one. Thing two is where are we putting what I'll call next generation regional data centers in OCONUS, and partnering potentially with a cloud service provider that has a data center there, working through that. So there's a lot that has to be unpacked. There's a lot of legal policy regulations that are driving us to be in a certain posture, but we are working through those now to see what's in the realm of possible. And then you also have these portable type devices like AWS's Snowball that can be used more downrange. And so it's really threading the needle for all of that and making sure that we have the infrastructure in place to push that to the edge. And then to round that piece out, once we've done all that, we need to make sure that the warfighters that are at the edge are able to use the capabilities. And so we need to constantly have that plan in place where we're educating and ensuring that we have the right skilling for them to be able to take full advantage of the technology to execute their mission.
You just brought up identity, and I want to make sure we get to that in our last couple minutes. Can you just say a bit about how central that is to the whole software modernization strategy working, and does it need to be a common enterprise service?
I believe it needs to be a common enterprise service. I think it's just because how else are we going to be joint? How else are we going to be able to achieve some of the stated goals of Joint All Domain C2? And so I think for having ICAM be a central enterprise place and then being able to work from that is, to me, a linchpin, not only just for software modernization, but for the work that we're trying to do with our zero trust principles too.
Very good. That is a great place to leave it. I think we are going to have to say goodbye, and I appreciate you taking the time, Ms. Metz. This has been a great way to kick off our DoD Cloud Exchange for 2022. Thanks for doing it.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you.
And we are just getting started for the 2022 DoD Cloud Exchange. Later in the week, you're going to hear perspectives from other DoD leaders on their consumption of cloud computing. Later today, you'll hear from Paul Puckett, the director of the Army Enterprise Cloud Management Agency. First up, though, we're going to transition to an industry perspective. Derek Pledger from Leidos is going to join us to talk about some of the unique benefits a multi-cloud strategy can provide DoD and the military services. My colleague Jason Miller has the lead for that conversation, and now we'll toss it over to Jason.